Okay. So real quick, as far as its sort of its tips here, things you should know before you start this test. Don't spend too much time on a question if you're not certain of the answer. Answer it the best you can and go on to the next question. That is good advice when it comes to testing. Don't get wrapped up in one question and worry about it, because a couple things will happen. First off, you're going to spend too much time on it, and then that question will start eating at you, and it's going to start raising your anxiety because you're not sure if you got that one right or anything like that. So use your other test taking skills. Use process of elimination. Use a little inferences and stuff like that to come to the best conclusion for your answer, and then forget about it. Right, move on to the next question. If you're not certain of the answer to a question, you can mark your answer using the flag. We're not going to worry about that on the question screen, or well, maybe we'll see what happens. At the end of the test, you can return to the question using the questions review screen. Okay, well, maybe we'll do that. Some questions are based on materials presented on the left side of a split screen. Make sure to read each page on the left side before trying to answer the questions on the right side of the screen. So this is going to look similar to what your test will look like if you're taking it online. Well, you guys will be taking it online, whether you're at like a testing facility or you take it at home. It'll be sort of the same format. Okay, so let's take a look at what we're getting into here. Okay, so the first question. We have a table here on the, let's see. So we've got page 1, page 2, and page 3. Okay, so the chart below describes the 4 methods used to amend the U.S. Constitution, which we talked a little bit about. 4 methods of amending the U.S. Constitution. Step 1, a 2/3 vote in both houses of the U.S. Congress. Step 2, ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures. This is the most common way we talked about this, to add an amendment to the Constitution. The second one, step 1, a 2/3 vote in both houses of the U.S. Congress. Step 2, ratified by ratification conventions in 3/4 of the states. So pretty much as similar as the first. I think in the first case, it just goes to the state legislature. In the second, it's more of a convention of the states, which is going to include more than just the legislative bodies of the states. The third way, which I've mentioned, a national constitutional convention called by 2/3 of the state legislatures. And then step 2, ratified by 3/4 of the state legislature. So here you actually bypass U.S. Congress, right? If the state, 2/3 of the states get together for a constitutional convention and they all agree to, amend this, and then 3/4 of the states afterward ratify it, then you get a new amendment without the federal government involved. And then finally, a national constitutional convention called by 2/3 of the state legislatures, and then ratified by ratification conventions in 3/4 of the states. So not just legislative bodies there. So very similar in each step. It's either, one thing is for certain with an amendment, it will always go to the states for ratification before it becomes an amendment. So that's the difference between that and when a regular bill becomes a law. Okay, so let's look at page 2. So this is very much like what your GED test will look like. Page 2, in 1787, delegates to the Constitutional Convention decided to give state legislatures the power to select U.S. senators. The purpose was to ensure that the interests of the states were represented in the national legislature. However, some argued that the people should directly elect their senators. They thought the interest of the states would be preserved because the people were the source of all government power. The first of nearly 300 congressional resolutions calling for direct election of senators came in 1826. Over the next 85 years, an amendment to directly elect U.S. senators was debated extensively. Finally, In 1913, the 17th Amendment, which allowed for the direct election of senators, was ratified. So initially in the US Constitution, it didn't have language there to elect, like we do today, our congressman or the president. And over time, that has become a more of a democratic process involving the people as the years went on. This excerpt is from an article published in the Washington Times, 1908. The senator said the reasons for this reform are thoroughly well understood. It will prevent the corruption of the legislatures. It will prevent men buying a seat in the Senate and make the Senate more responsive to the will of the people. It will also make candidates campaign before the people. So before, they were basically appointed by other legislatures. Your US senators would have been appointed by state legislatures, right? So let's go to Delasha first for our first question here. Delasha, which statement correctly describes an important way that the process of amending the US Constitution is different from the process of creating federal laws? So is it A, only one government branch is involved in the amendment process? B, only one legislative body can conclude the amendment process? C, only state legislatures are involved in the amendment process? Or D, only state governments can start the amendment process?
Okay, we still got it. It is important investors different process creating federal law. Is it D, only state government can start the amendment process?
Did you say D as in dog?
D.
B as in boy. Only one legislative body can conclude the amendment process. We're going to select
D.
Oh, D. D as in dog, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Only state governments can start the amendment process. Let's see. So we're going to answer D. You know what? I'm going to flag it just to see what happens here down the road. So D. Okay, so it's just moving on. We will get our answers at the end, whether we're right or wrong here. So there's 9 questions total. Okay, so Mariama, we are using the same information here. So I'm going to go to you now. Which concern about the original method of selecting senators is implied in the excerpt? So is it A, it failed to limit the influence of the wealthy? B, it did not help to organize debates effectively? C, it neglected to limit the influence of the majority? Or D, it did not encourage an efficient lawmaking process?
I think it's B.
B. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and flag all of these to see what happens, and it'll give us a chance to look at them. So we'll go with B. It did not help to organize debates effectively. Okay, let's see. Going on to the next question here. So Levon, are you available here to answer the next question for us? Let's say, what does the word convention mean in both the chart and the 17th Amendment passage? Is it A, a cultural tradition, B, a formal assembly, C, agreed upon contract, or D, preferred writing style? Okay, Vaughn's not available. We'll go on to Debbie then. Debbie, we'll give this one to you. What does the word convention mean here in this context? Is it a cultural tradition, a formal assembly, agreed upon contract, or preferred writing style?
C.
C, and C as in cat, agreed upon?
Yep.
Okay, all right, we'll take a look. We're finished up here. Okay, now we got some new information. We've got a little bit of text. We've got a graph. So since the 19th century, many people have worked for equal rights for women. We've been, you could guarantee that when you get to your test, you're probably going to have a question about suffrage and the suffrage movement as much as we've covered it. So much of this effort focused on suffrage, which is the right to vote. One of the greatest victories for advocates of women's rights was ratification of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution in 1920. The 19th Amendment stated that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. However, the struggle for equality in other areas of society continued even after the 19th Amendment granted women suffrage. Now, the graph we have here showing number of women in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1917 to 2011. Okay, so let's see here. So it's going by sessions of Congress, right? So that's where it starts is going to be around 1917 or so, and we see maybe one in the 65th session of Congress, and then over time, right, we see quite a steady increase. And then when we get to more of the modern era, right, we get into, say, I think that's probably around the 1980s or so, we see a sharp increase. So the number of women representatives is counted in the tens there. So by the time we get to sort of today's era, we have over 70 women as representatives in the U.S. House of Representatives. And of course, we know this, like if you could think about all the names that we hear on a day-to-day basis, how many Congress people, both in the Senate and House of Representatives, are women. So Jessica, if you're available here, what do the passage and graph indicate about the United States in the 20th and 21st centuries? A, social movements halted inequalities within society. B, the changes in voting rights impacted representation in the U.S. government. C, democratic principles are more powerful than cultural traditions. D, the Civil War amendments created greater democratic opportunities for women.
Hold on, I think you froze up. My screen froze up.
I'm sorry, what was that?
My screen had froze up.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, you know what? I am going to go ahead and give this one a try then. So see if you can get it working there. In the meantime, so what do the passage and graph indicate? I believe, because we're looking at women's voting rights, and the graph is showing how representation changed. The correct answer is going to be B. So the changes in voting rights impacted representation in the U.S. government. All right, and Kate is agreeing with me there. So B, and then Kate, this one's going to be for you. Let's see what we got. So type the appropriate session of Congress in the box. So the number of women representatives who served in the blank Congress was twice the number of women representatives who served in the 101st Congress. So let's see here. So 101st Congress was right about here, and that's about 30.
It will be like 28 or 29.
So, well, that's the number of women. So the number of the congressional session. So the number of women representatives who served in the blank Congress session was twice the number of women representatives who served in the 101st Congress. So here's our sessions of Congress.
So that would be like 100, 102, 100. That would be 101.
101.
Yeah.
Okay, we're looking at the 101, right? So that was what we need is the number that's going to be twice the number that served in the 101st Congress. So it's going to be on this far end.
So does it mean it doubles?
Yeah, we want a number that's close to double.
That
So-
would be 49 to 50 in between.
Yeah, so it's going to
50.
be, if we look at the graph, it's going to be,
104.
okay, I think that's probably pretty close, either 104 or 105. So let's take a look here. All right, so we'll say 104, because if it looks, the 101st session, I would say it's about 21 or 22. So it's got to be close to 50 here. We'll see how that goes. That's a little hard of a graph to look at. Let's see, Nautica, for you, which statement explains the number of women serving in the U.S. House of Representatives during the 65th congressional session? A, women lacked suffrage rights at the national level. States use literacy tests to restrict women's voting rights. C, women resisted involvement in politics at the national level. Or D, states prohibited political campaigns by women. So looking all the way back here at the 65th session of Congress, we have like maybe one woman serving then. What was keeping them from having more?
Is it A?
Women lack suffrage rights at the national level. I believe that is the case, right? Because they didn't have federal voting rights until the 19th Amendment in 1920. But because that was some states had provided the women the right to vote, it's possible then that you had maybe one or two women serving in the U.S. Congress because their states allowed them to be elected. So yeah, I'm thinking it's A there. Okay. Okay. New information, lots of information. So let's see here what all we have. Okay, so so we have to pick graphs here. All right. So first off, which three graphs relate to the concept of sustainability? Click on the three graphs that you want to select. So Delasha, this one's going to be for you. And we have 5 different graphs. We need to pick 3. So I guess we just click on it maybe. Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. So we'll just check mark it. So you tell me, what do you think is about sustainability here?
There's like, we can pick any graph or?
You need to pick 3 of these
What do you mean?
graphs. Yeah, that are basically talking about sustainability being being able to maintain resources, right? Sustaining with our population growth, managing to make sure that we have enough resources for everybody.
Okay.
Is it
Can you go
the
like little bit up?
Sorry, what was that?
Can you move a little bit up
Like,
so I can see all the graph? Oh, that's all.
okay. Oh, here we go. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. This should be interrelated or
It'll be related to sustainability, right? So we want 3 options here that are sort of dealing with, our ability to continue to thrive on this planet, basically.
so will it be the first graph?
World population growth, I believe so, right? Because we're
and
talking.
then the second one, deforested area, because if the population grows.
Well,
There
that's
you
just
go.
for,
Uh-huh.
and then will it be the global oil consumption?
I believe
Global oil
that's,
consumption.
yeah, that should be the 3, right? Because those kind of are tied to, sustainability. Worldwide non-immigrant visa issuances is just the movement of people, right? So it doesn't really, there's no correlation there as far as sustainability. U.S. representatives, right? That's also something that's kind of out of bounds. So population growth obviously is really, really important to sustainability. We add, exponentially more people. You can see on that graph, right? Before the common era, there was well less than 1 billion people on the planet. It's not until we get into the common era and well into it before we even get 1 billion people. And then from that point forward, it's just kept expanding. So, providing for all these people is an issue. Tropical area deforested, right? So that's a problem when it comes to climate change, global warming, and resources and things like that. And then global oil consumption, right? So here, talking about it by region, how much the U.S. Uses in oil compared to other developed countries and the rest of the world. So yeah, I think we got it covered there. Okay, now we have another graph here. Oh, I think this is going to be like a drag and drop maybe. Yeah, we're going to drag these bars over. So the information below from the Congressional Research Service to complete the graph. The United States has spent large amounts of money since the turn of the 20th century to support involvement in major wars. From 1917 to 1921, the total cost of military involvement in World War I was around $20 billion. Approximately $296 billion was spent on World War II. Military operations between 1941 and 1945, right? That's World War II. The United States spent nearly $30 billion to wage the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. From 1965 to 1975, the year spanning the Vietnam War, the U.S. government spent about $111 billion on military efforts. Now, click on the 4 blue bars and drag them onto the graph to show the amount of spending on each of the 4 wars. So we kind of have to line up these graphs. Maybe I'll do this one because it's kind of a lot going on here. So this one's going to be 250.
96 million.
Well, let's see, that's 300 billion, right? So it's close. So that's going to be World War II, right?
Oh,
Yeah, see here, 296 billion.
96.
Okay, so this one you actually have to kind of line up to see how much.
100 to
We're
111.
Yeah, in Vietnam.
So this is,
Vietnam, I think. Vietnam was
okay, so
101.
here,
111 is
The-
Vietnam War.
No, 200.
that's
That's
200, right? So that let's look at this one, because we might not use that one, right? Because we have more bars than we have. So that is 111. So that's going to be Vietnam, right? Korean War. Let's see. This is
30.
that is about 80, right? Let's see. Maybe
Yeah,
I can use one of
World
these.
War I is 20, so that should be the smallest one.
Okay.
Korean is 30 billion.
So here we got the smallest one is about 20. Wait a minute.
World War
World
One.
War I.
World War.
30 billion is Korean.
And then 30 is going to be Korean.
It's
Okay,
Korean.
Yes.
that is definitely, yeah, that's more. Okay, so I think we got it figured out here, right? And this one is a little bit of eyeballing, right? But we can check again. So World War I, 20
20.
billion total. So that looks about like 20 billion. World War II, 300 billion, or close to it, right? 296 billion. We definitely got that one correct. Korean War, about 30 billion. I think we got that. And then certainly Vietnam as well, which is about 111. So I think this should work, right? So, and that's something that you might see as like a drag. Well, here's another drag and drop. So we'll work on this one together too here. Capitalism versus communism. So this is something that we've talked about, right? Much of the 20th century was marked by the Cold War between the ideals of capitalism and communism. So we're going to drag each phrase into the correct box to show whether it is associated with capitalism or communism. So, profit motive. What do you think there that goes?
Communism.
Communism.
Said capitalism, communism. Capitalism. I think it's capitalism, right? Profit motive.
Capitalism.
Income redistribution.
It's communism.
Right. Classless society.
That's communism.
Communism. Yeah.
Communism.
Private ownership.
Capitalism.
Communism.
Competitive markets.
Capitalism.
State ownership of all property.
Communism.
Communism.
So this is really good sort of graphic to sort of explain some of those ideas, right? Privately owned businesses, private property, motivated by profit, competitive markets, right? Markets drive prices of goods in capitalism. Communism, you have income redistribution. In theory, you have classless society. Doesn't always work that way, but that's the idea, is to eliminate class, right? You don't have a lower income class, you don't have middle income, you don't have high income. It's one class. And then state ownership of all property, right? So whether it's like socialism, which, communism is a form of socialism, much of your property is owned by the state. The production of goods and services is typically owned by the state, right? All right, so now we have an opportunity to review the questions and our answers. So let's take a look here. Click next. Okay, so. Oh, it's just flagging them. Oh, okay, so if we want to go back, well, let's just take a look here. Well, can't see at the bottom because I have a bar there, of course. End review. We'll just do that, see what happens. Doesn't to end. Are you sure you want to end the review? Yes. Okay, we'll see how we did here. Oh, it's not going to give us our answers. Well. Okay, well, that's kind of lame. So they're going to make us try to buy something to, keep going. Okay. Well, that didn't work out exactly how I wanted it. Let's try this one over here and see how we do. So maybe this one will give us some, well, we won't get through all the questions. We'll try about 10 or so and see how we do. So the following table provides information on Irish immigration during the mid-19th century, right? So from 1841 to 1854, and we have the number of Irish immigrants coming to the United States in each one of those years. So let's see, Nilda, I'll give you a chance at this one here. So which of the following statements most accurately describes patterns of Irish immigration in the mid-19th century? It remained relatively unchanged. It continually increased between 1847 and 1854. It continually declined between 1847 and 1854. Okay, Nilda's driving. So Delasha, we'll give this one to you. Or did it peak in approximately 1851?
Is it D?
B.
Last one.
Oh,
It
D.
peaked at, yeah.
Yeah, I think it did. So let's check here. It should give us our answer right away. Check. Well, okay, maybe it won't. Let's see. Let's keep going here, see what happens. 2. Okay. So the following excerpt is from a speech by President Woodrow Wilson in 1918, endorsing the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. He said, "I regard the concurrence of the Senate in the constitutional amendment proposing the extension of the suffrage to women as vitally essential to the successful prosecution of the great war of humanity in which we are engaged. It is my duty to win the war and to ask you to remove every obstacle that stands in the way of winning it." So how does the constitutional amendment process begin? So Mariama, is it the president can introduce proposed amendments? Congress can introduce an amendment by a 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate. 2/3 of the states may convene a constitutional convention and introduce amendments, or citizens can collect enough signatures to get an amendment on the ballot.
It's A.
I think here we can choose more than one. So A,
Oh, okay. B
B,
and C.
and C. Yeah. Yeah, I think it is all 3 there. So we'll keep going. Okay, so the following excerpt is from President Thomas Jefferson's first inaugural address in 1801. "Still one thing more, fellow citizens, a wise and frugal government which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. This is the sum of good government." What ideology best describes Jefferson's political philosophy? Levon, is it federalism, republicanism, fascism, or anarchism? B. Yeah, she says republicanism. I am pretty sure, right? Because he was a Democratic Republican and he believed in the early republic. Federalists were the sort of opposing party, your Alexander Hamiltons and your John Adams and those dudes. So republicanism is certainly the answer there. And we have another, let's see, the following table contains information on urbanization rates in the United States between 1790 and 2010. Right? Percent of total population living in urban areas through basically the entire course of US history. So 1790, only 5% of the total population lived in urban areas. Everybody else lived in rural communities. And then you could see every year that it increases until 2010. 80% of Americans now live in a urban area. So Debbie, Which of the following statements most accurately describes urbanization patterns in the United States between 1790 and 2010? Until about 1930, less than half of Americans lived in cities. Urbanization rates stopped increasing after 1970. The urbanization rate peaked in 1970, or the urbanization rate increased quickly between 1790 and 1830.
It's can I see the future? Can you go to the question?
Sure. Go.
Organization that is talking to you now. Is D?
D, the urbanization rate. I think it's A.
A?
Look here, yes, in 1930, right, there's about 55%. So anytime before 1930, we have less than half the population that's urban. The other one, so like you said, D, the urbanization rate increased quickly. 5, 7, 9, not real quick. It was steadily growing, but not really rapidly. So I think what we want to go with here is, until about 1930, about half the population was. Okay, next one. So scenario describes an economic decision. After graduating from high school, Juan applies to several job advertisements and receives an offer to work as a clerk in a retail store for $8 per hour. However, Juan decides to enroll in a community college, and after 2 years, he completes a technical training program that prepares him to become a welder. After completing the program, he finds employment as an apprentice welder and earns $20 per hour. Which was the opportunity cost in Juan's decision? So this is something we didn't discuss very much. That's something that may or may not come up on a test. So an opportunity cost is the cost of tuition at the community college. I'll go ahead and take care of this question here and give you a little explanation. The difference between Juan's wages as a welder and a retail clerk, Juan's wages and an apprentice welder, or the total wages he would have earned in 2 years while working as a retail clerk. It's the cost of tuition, right? So that is the opportunity cost here to, further his career. Okay, so do we check that? Right. On to 6. So the following is an excerpt from the Triple Alliance Treaty signed between Germany, Austria, and Italy. Remember, we talked about the Triple Alliance. These are the folks that were part of World War I that the United States, France, Great Britain, and Russia fought against. Article 1, the contracting parties mutually promise peace and friendship, and they further promise one another mutual support. Article 3, if one or two of the contracting parties, without direct provocation on their part, should chance to be attacked and to be engaged in a war with 2 or more great powers, the case for the alliance will arise simultaneously for all the contracting parties. Article 6, the contracting parties mutually promise secrecy as to the contents and existence of the present treaty. In what way, if at all, did the Triple Alliance Treaty influence World War I? Jessica, I ask you this one. So in what way did it affect World War I? None. The treaty had no relationship to World War I because it was signed after the war occurred. B, the treaty helped prevent or delay World War I because countries around the world knew about the agreement and were reluctant to attack Italy, Germany, or Austria. C, the treaty made it difficult to avoid a large conflict because it required several countries to assist each other in case one member was attacked. Or D, The treaty helped prevent or delay World War I because every country in Europe signed the agreement.
Would it be V?
See, D as in dog or B as in boy?
V as in boy?
B as in boy, the treaty helped prevent or delay. I believe it's actually C. The treaty made it difficult to avoid a large conflict because it required countries to assist each other. So remember, we talked about there's all these alliances before World War I. So if somebody had a beef with another country, it wound up pulling everybody into the war because of these treaties and alliances. Let's see here. Okay, number 7. All right, the following excerpt, we actually talked about this yesterday, is from the 1803 Supreme Court decision, Marbury versus Madison, which established the concept of judicial review. We've talked about that quite a bit, what judicial review is. It is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. Those who apply the rule to particular cases must, of necessity, expound and interpret that rule. If 2 laws conflict with each other, the courts must decide on the operation of each. Kate, so the ruling is an example of which of the following concepts? A, checks and balances, B, federalism, C, natural rights, or D, reserved powers.
Please, the question again.
So the ruling is an example. So on this Supreme Court decision, y'all give me just a second. Somebody's at my door. Just bear with me. Go ahead and take a look at the question. I'll be right back. Okay, sorry about that. It was actually my daughter. So locked her out. Okay, so did you guys come to a conclusion yet? What this answer is?
Reserve power.
I think it's
Check and balance.
Is it federalism?
Think it's this one. I'm a little confused on myself. I think it's either reserve powers or checks and balances.
Check and balances.
Right, because this is where we get into the situation where the Supreme Court has the ability. If it's talking about judicial review, I think it's going to be checks and balances, because that is their role in governance, is making sure that our laws are constitutional. So we'll go with that one there. And 8. Okay, it looks like we've got a map. The following excerpt is from the Warsaw Security Pact, which was signed in 1955 by the Soviet Union, Albania, Bulgaria, Hungary, East Germany, Poland, Romania, and Czechoslovakia. So the Warsaw Pact was, just to give you some background there. Oh, well, it's sort of like NATO, and I think it mentions it here. So it's a collective defense agreement. It's an alliance, just like they had in sort of World War I. Albania, Bulgaria, Hungary, East Germany, Poland, Romania, Czechoslovakia were not, and we've talked about this, they were not part of the Soviet Union. However, they were very closely aligned with the Soviet Union, to the point that you could almost say that they were puppet states. They followed what the Soviet Union, what was happening in Moscow, very closely, and they were basically communist governments there. So the excerpt here says the contracting parties, mindful at the same time of the situation created in Europe by the formation of a new military alignment in the shape of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So that's NATO, the United States, Great Britain, France, yada, 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 which increased the danger of another war and constitutes a threat to the national security of the peaceable states, have agreed as follows. Article 4, in the event of armed attack in Europe on one or more of the parties to the treaty, shall immediately come to the assistance of the state or states attacked with all such means as it deems necessary, including armed force. So it's sort of like the NATO treaty, right? If somebody gets attacked, we will, jump in to help. And the following map here it depicts Europe during the Cold War. So members of NATO are in blue, while members of the Warsaw Pact are in red. It was called the Warsaw Pact because it was, the convention was in Warsaw, Poland. All that blue area, those are NATO countries, all the way over here to Turkey, right? Greece, Italy, West Germany at the time, France, Spain, Portugal, Great Britain, little Iceland, they were all part. The question then, and we'll see, Nautica, we'll give this one to you. Which of the following statements best describes the motives for creating the Warsaw Security Pact? A, the Soviet Union was an aggressive and hostile adversary bent on using military force to invade Western Europe. B, the Soviet Union wanted to take the moral high ground of the Cold War by renouncing the use of force. C, the Soviet Union wanted to create an agreement that would peacefully unite all of Europe. Or D, the Soviet Union felt threatened by the creation of NATO and responded by forming its own collective security agreement.
Is it C? Wait. Yeah, is it C?
It's D. D is in dog. So NATO, initially, the United States was not part of that. But very early on, I think before we get out of the 1940s, NATO is created. And then, so, we had this collective agreement. I think I mentioned Article 5 of the NATO Charter is basically states if, an attack on one is considered an attack on all. So if, Belgium gets attacked by Poland, or West Germany gets attacked by East Germany, anything like that, it's going to pull all of the NATO allies into a war. So, little dangerous, right? Because we talked about World War I and what that meant. The ticket here, the key element though, it's basically telling everybody in the world that if you mess with Italy, you mess with Greece, you mess with Turkey, what you're doing is messing with the United States, right? That's what really underscored, right, the idea there. So as a response, the Warsaw Pact, right, was sort of the same idea. So, the Soviet Union kind of felt threatened by this collective defense agreement. Might I add, Putin today is very concerned about NATO. And one of the reasons that he probably attacked Ukraine was to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO. Now we're looking at Finland and Sweden up here, these two dudes, joining NATO as well. They were kind of, Finland was sort of aligned with the Soviet Union, but they were pretty neutral. Sweden is typically kind of neutral. But now they're joining as, sort of a response to some of the actions Russia's been taking. So yeah, the Soviet Union wanted to create an agreement that would peacefully unite all of Europe. Okay, let's do a few more here. Another map. So it looks like we're going into the map section now. And I think this looks like, well, something we might be a little bit familiar with. 1960 presidential election. So the following map and table depicts the 1960 presidential election. We have our three main candidates. JFK, of course, Nixon, and that can't be Robert Byrd. Isn't I'm just curious. So what we have there, right, are the electoral votes. We talked about electoral votes, right? So the representatives, each state has a number of electoral votes based on the number of representatives in the state plus their 2 senators. Okay, so for example, there was 23 representatives from Ohio in 1960. Or sorry, there would have been 23 plus their 2 US senators, right? That makes 25. And so that is Harry Byrd. Let me see. Sorry, no. Well, let me see here. Sorry, it's just that is bothering me a little bit. Anyway, so we see the Electoral College votes. And who won each state there. So, yeah, well, that's taking me too long to find it. Anyway, oh yeah, it was Harry Byrd from Virginia, conservative from Virginia. So he didn't even win a state. So I was curious because there was Robert C. Byrd from West Virginia that was a really powerful senator for a number of years. But I didn't think that's who it was. And yeah, so here we have Democrat John F. Kennedy. It was a very close popular vote. 49.72% of the popular vote was won by Kennedy. However, he took 303 electoral votes. So if we added up all our little blue states there, and looks like Alabama at the time split their electoral votes. So Kennedy got 5. If we added those all up, we come up with 303. You need, everybody remember how many electoral votes you need to win the presidency?
It's 270.
Blam, yeah, 270. So he got 303, Nixon 219. So the question then, and we're going back to DeLasha here, why did Kennedy become president if he received less than 50% of the popular vote? So is it A, Kennedy won because he had more popular votes than Nixon, even though this accounted for less than 50%? B, when no candidate receives more than 50% of the popular vote, the Supreme Court picks the winner. C, Kennedy won a majority in the Electoral College, or D, Kennedy carried more states than Nixon.
Kennedy won a majority in the Electoral College.
That's it, right? Yeah, C. There's been several occasions. Now, he actually still won the popular vote. There's been several elections where the winner did not win the popular vote. Most recently was the Trump-Clinton election. Hillary Clinton had 2 million and some more votes than Trump. I think the Gore-Bush election was the same thing. And you'll notice also that those tend to be very, very close races that comes down to, really, really close electoral votes. So yeah, that was Kennedy won a majority in electoral college. That's how we decide the president, whoever reaches 270 electoral votes. Now, the following excerpt is from a speech by President Harry Truman in 1947. Remember, Truman took over for Franklin Roosevelt. The very existence of the Greek state is today threatened by the terrorist activities of several thousand armed men led by communists who defy the government's authority at the number of points, particularly along the northern boundaries. Meanwhile, the Greek government is unable to cope with the situation. The Greek army is small and poorly equipped. Greece must have assistance if it is to become a self-supporting and self-respecting democracy. What prompted Truman to provide aid to the Greek government? Mariama, was it A, international or internal conflict within Greece between communists and the government? B, President Truman was embarrassed by the weakness of the Greek army? C, the USSR had invaded and defeated the Greek government? Or D, the Greek army needed weapons to defend the country's northern border?
C.
So here it's A, it was internal conflict. So there was a communist party within Greece. And as he says, today the very existence of the Greek state is threatened by the terrorist activities of several thousand armed men led by communists who defy the government's authority at a number of points. So you can infer then, right, that this is a internal issue. So internally there was communists, and that was I forget what that was called, the Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine, which supplied Greece and Turkey with military aid, and then not long after that, they also become NATO members, both Turkey and Greece. So they're kind of staunchly in, Team West and Team USA for the Cold War. And let's see, 11. Oh, that's the same thing. The following excerpt is a speech from, this is FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, in 1933. So remember what I told you about Franklin Roosevelt and what he's known for. So we had a banking situation. This is what he said in 1933. Some of our bankers had shown themselves either incompetent or dishonest in their handling of the people's funds. It was the government's job to straighten out this situation and do it as quickly as possible. And the job is being performed. Confidence and courage are the essentials of success in carrying out our plan. You people must have faith. You must not be stampeded by rumors or guesses. Let us unite in banishing fear. Now, Levant, based on the excerpt, how did historical circumstances shape President Roosevelt's point of view? A, he felt government regulation was necessary because many citizens lacked faith in the banking system. B, he felt government regulation was necessary in order to punish incompetent or dishonest bankers. C, he felt government regulation would help prevent another stock market crash. Or D, he felt government regulation was unnecessary because it would spark only rumors and fear. A, yes, yeah, right. So we talked about this. He had to step in. This was right at one of the worst parts of the Great Depression, right after he was elected. And I mentioned there was what they call a run on the banks, where people are pulling their cash out because they're scared to leave it in the bank, which is going to cause banks to fail. So he had to step in and basically reassure people, right, that they're going to, aid the banks in order to, keep this huge banking failure from happening. So one thing you can always think about when it comes to Roosevelt as a Democrat, and the way he wanted to lift the U.S. out of the Great Depression and end the economic crisis was through, regulation, was through spending, through, public programs and things like that to get people back to work. So he was a very involved president, and the government was very involved in those activities. A more Republican sort of conservative idea would be to, reduce restrictions and regulations on business and let business do what business does, right? Laissez-faire economics, and with minimal, only when it was most necessary to intervene with some type of regulation or government interference. So that's kind of the two sides that were at work there. So 12. Now this is following excerpt is from a speech by Congressman James Madison in 1789 on the introduction of the Bill of Rights. James Madison wrote the Constitution. Well, he wrote the Bill of Rights. There have been objections of various kinds made about the Constitution, but I believe that the great mass of the people who opposed it disliked it because it did not contain effectual provision against encroachments on particular rights, and those safeguards which they have been long accustomed to have interposed between them and the magistrate who exercised the sovereign power. It will be practicable on that ground to satisfy the public mind that their liberties will be perpetual. Why did Madison and many other Americans feel that the Bill of Rights was necessary? Debbie? Was it to A, protect the U.S. government from foreign powers, B, to prevent a rebellion against the Constitution, C, to grant the U.S. government additional powers, or D, to protect individual rights and liberties?
D.
Very good. Yeah. So that was the difference, right? We talked a little bit about the Articles of Confederation, which was sort of the government system that came before the U.S. Constitution very, 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 very early on in the new, Republic of the United States. But it wasn't strong enough. There wasn't enough of a central government to really hold us together. And we needed to have a little bit more powerful central government. But people like Madison, for one, who was a Democratic Republican, right? He was on Team Jefferson, was concerned about, okay, so let's say we put in this new Constitution. That Bill of Rights that he wrote was to guarantee that if we sort of expand our central government and make it more powerful, that we will protect the individual rights and liberties of Americans. So that was why, it was a compromise there that, okay, we'll use this Constitution, but we're going to start with 10 amendments that are all about individual rights. All right. And we'll try maybe one or two more here. The following is an excerpt from a speech by President Barack Obama. We didn't get up to President Obama in class, so let's see what President Obama has to say. Nearly 200 nations have assembled here this week, a declaration that for all the challenges we face, the growing threat of climate change will define the contours of the century more dramatically than any other. 14 of the 15 warmest years on record have occurred since the year 2000, and 2015 is on pace to be the warmest year of all. This summer, I saw the effects of climate change firsthand in our northernmost state, Alaska, where the sea is already swallowing villages and eroding shoreline. All right, Jessica. So which of the following is an opinion and not a fact? So nearly 200 nations have assembled here this week. B, the growing threat of climate change will define the contours of the century more dramatically than any other. C, 14 of the 15 warmest years on record have occurred since the year 2000. D, 2015 is on pace to be the warmest year of all. Which of those is an opinion and not a fact? All right, Jessica there. Let's try Kate. Kate, how about you give this one a go? What is a
Can I
fact?
see the question again?
Sure. So it's which of the following is an opinion and not a fact? And we have, different pieces of information from
I mean the passage.
the excerpt here, or you want the question?
Let's go back to the answers, please. The B.
B. Yeah. Good
B
way.
as in boy.
B as in boy. Yeah. So, this very likely going to be something you might, this is the realm of either language arts or social studies where you may see a question like this on a test. What's fact and what's opinion here? First thing to think about, right? If they're throwing around numbers, that's pretty hard data, right? So that's typically facts. Nearly 200 nations have assembled here this week, right? That's verifiable, right? I always say about facts, you can verify that. 14 of the 15 warmest years on record have occurred since the year 2000. I can check that. 2015 on pace to be the warmest year of all. Okay, now he's looking at the prior data. He's using data to, forecast that. So that's pretty much a fact. His opinion, though, is the growing threat of climate change will define the contours of the century more dramatically than any other. All right. It's a well-informed opinion. He's using facts to support that, but there is nothing in there that is hard data, right? How can you verify? How can you check that the growing threat of climate change will define the contours of the century? Can't do that. So it's opinion. We're not going to get through these. Let's go ahead and do one more. Oh, we may have looked at this before too. I know we looked at some political cartoons. So this is a political cartoon from the Harper's Weekly magazine in the or newspaper in the 1800s. So let's see here. I will go to Nautica for this one. So the caption says, of course he wants to vote the Democratic ticket, right? We got two white dudes pointing their revolvers at this black man. 1876, and which we talked about, voting rights and things. So how did the cartoon reflect historical circumstances during Reconstruction in the South? A, African Americans and Caucasians could only legally vote for the Democratic Party during Reconstruction. B, African Americans immediately exercised full civil and political rights in the South after the abolition of slavery. C, African Americans were still subject to harassment and intimidation in the South after the Civil War. D, white Southerners were forced to defend themselves when African Americans took up arms against their former masters. So,
Can I see the picture again?
cartoon, yeah, there we go.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's C.
C, right? Yeah. So very early on, after the slave population was, first slavery was their status was changed from enslaved to free under the Emancipation Proclamation, right? Then we had amendments to abolish slavery. All right, so this is in order. They abolished slavery with an amendment, then gave basically all rights to former slaves. They made them citizens, and another amendment. No more, you're not just free anymore. You are an American citizen, and then the right to vote, which by the end of the 1860s, your former African slave population or black slave population in the South were voting. And then very quickly, they were pressured, they were harassed, they were intimidated through violence and all of this to either influence their vote or keep them from voting. So this, will see some type of political cartoons, which we talked about really, really early on. And we showed you a couple different ones, but, you have to be kind of cynical. There's often a lot of cynicism in political cartoons. It's editorializing, right? It's opinionated, but it will be something about whatever period they're looking at and give you some commentary on, so like Nilo says, here, of course, racism is a huge part of that, but it's giving you some type of commentary about the issues of the day. All right. So some are a little more obvious. This one's pretty obvious, what it is explaining there, and this idea of voter intimidation. Others, might be a little more subtle, but you may see a political cartoon or two on your test. I think this is probably where I wish it would actually show me the answers. Wonder if I just go to the last one and answer what will happen. Let's just see. No, it's not going to give me the answers. I think we got everything right there, though, and corrected. So sorry that we couldn't see, the actual answers, but I think we've worked through this week about 70 questions or so. So I think you guys, certainly understand the format now. What you're going to see on your test, it'll either be a little bit of information, it may be a little excerpt, it might be a quote from a politician or some historical figure, it might be a document, it may be something from the Bill of Rights or the Emancipation Proclamation or the Gettysburg Address, anything like that. And then you'll have a question related to that you're going to have to do a little critical thinking and analysis. So some of that prior historical knowledge is going to help. Sometimes like a question on, is this fact or opinion? It's just a matter of analyzing the data that you're seeing there and what's expressed. And again, same thing with like maps, graphs, bar charts, right? You're going to have to look at that information. Unfortunately, some of the ones that we look at are a little hard to read. On your test, they'll be, they'll make it a little more obvious, right? So you won't have to sit there and be like, is that, 101 or 102 and stuff like that. But, understanding where data intersects between your bottom data and your side data, right? What's going across and what's going up and down. So any questions before we take a little break here for language arts?
Yeah, what's the passing mark by percentage?
Okay, so the scores, I don't know how it breaks down as far as percentages or number of questions you need to get right, but a perfect score is a 200. Okay. A passing score is 145. So that's what we're looking for. Anything above 145. So, you know, when you guys take your practice test, that's, you know, the bare minimum that you want to shoot for, right? So if you're, you know, 155, something like that, 160, boom, you're doing great. And, you know, you're ready for your final test.
So is it gonna be online or?
The practice test is online. So you'll just get basically some emails from Tracy Johnson, and she'll help you set it up. You can take it at any time. You know, it's no big deal, no sweat, whenever you can do it. I had to take it to get the job. So, and of course, that was a year ago. I don't remember, you know, any questions. I wish I had kind of paid more attention to it or recorded it or something. But yeah, so it's, you know, you'll just sit down at your computer and take it. The final test, okay, you have two options. So one thing, Rachel and I have kind of come to the conclusion, you guys are better off going to a testing center to take the final test, because you'll get to take, they'll give you like a dry erase board so you can like take some notes and, you know, like do math problems and stuff like that. If you take it at home, they're kind of jerks about it, because you actually have a proctor that's going to be watching you on camera while you take it. And we've had a couple issues with some students who were just like, you know, not reading out loud, but reading to themselves, and their lips were moving, and or, you know, looking away from their computer or something, and they made them like restart the test and do all this stuff. So if it's possible, we do suggest, and I know in the past, Rachel has sort of, you know, when several people are ready, you know, take you guys, there's not one real close. I think the closest one is like in Newark or somewhere. And she's just like gathered up a bunch of people and taken them all on the same day to take out, you know, knock out a test or two. So, yeah, but you, again, if, you know, whatever happens, you do have that option though of taking it home. But the practice test, yeah, that's all online whenever you want to do it. Yeah. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Is that all good? All right. In that case, all right, we'll stop there. And again, like next week, you know, tell Rachel if you guys want more social studies practice stuff. She's obviously, you know, this doesn't necessarily mean the end. Last session, you know, I went back and forth quite a bit as people, particularly like when you guys get ready, you know, if you take your practice test and you do well, and, you know, you're getting ready to take your final test and stuff, there's no issue with, you know, doing some more practice. Rachel certainly would be happy to, you know, do like some more social studies practice with you guys. So let's go ahead, take about 10 minutes, and then we'll hop into language arts at about 1:50. All right. I'll see you guys there in about 10. Bye-bye.